Good evening, everybody. You know that music, and you know it's time for a little bit of Gray Matters Radio. The place, like every good therapy session, operates somewhere in the world of the in-between, the gray area. I am your host, Michael DeVine, America's counselor. Why, you ask? Why gray? Why a counselor? Well, in case you haven't realized it, America's kind of stuck in between the bad marriage of Democrats and Republicans right now, and who better than a counselor to basically kind of sort all this out? Plus, I just took you guys on as a client without your permission. Ethical? I don't know, but I had to take it upon myself to kind of solve this. Now, naturally, this was way too big of a job for one man to kind of do on his own, so I needed help. I needed reinforcement. So my man, co-host, Bill Reed, the armchair quarterback himself, the armchair therapist.
Hello, Mike. How you doing? You talk about ethics, but then again, you remember we were talking politics. So.
We are talking politics, and there really isn't a lot of ethics in this, is there?
Well, some may argue there never really was to begin with. So, but I do think it's definitely gotten worse.
Well, it really has. But that's where it's kind of fitting that unethically, I just kind of took on the country as a client without their permission. I didn't ask them if they wanted therapy. I just decided to do it. And I guess they're listening that technically is consent, I guess.
I kind of wish at the next presidential debate that one of the, people that ask the questions there, and they're just, I wish they'd look at Trump or the Democratic candidate and just go, I choose business ethics. And then you just see both the candidates just stare at out of Billy Madison, just no clue whatsoever.
No, I mean it's crazy, and tonight's episode's gonna be fun, because this is one I've been wanting to do for a couple of weeks, but just the way guests have kind of been, we haven't had a chance to go and do it. But the Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, her Green New Deal. This is one where I've been looking at it. To me, it's almost like a lesson from college, almost like business ethics and principles and economic principle. And so I've been looking at this and wanting to dive into it, because everyone's been talking about the whole, is it communism, is it socialism, is it going to pass, is it not? But I wanted to actually dive in it from a factor of can it actually work?
Economically
speaking, can it work? Even the whole idea, the history of with communism, socialism, what actually does it resemble that at all? So, you and I are pretty damn smart, but obviously this is something that is not up our alley. So, to me, this was picture perfect. This is where we bring a professor in. So, Richard, DeVine, my dad, professor, how you doing?
Yeah, I'm here.
So this is why we have the professor as our political, military, economic correspondent, because frankly, the guy knows more than we do.
Well, it's not just a clever nickname either.
It is. I mean, the dude literally, he taught MBA classes, taught high school, years in supply chain healthcare, MBA. I mean, literally, the guy knows what he's doing. I mean, go on LinkedIn if you look at Richard DeVine. I mean, his credentials kind of speak for themselves, right?
Oh, absolutely, and that's probably why now, when we were kids, he would give us. I now understand why he would look at us and just be like, "What a couple of dumbasses." Am I wrong?
Yeah.
But this is actually one of those cool things, Dad. Actually, where growing up, everyone always asks me, I know a lot about a lot of random things, right? And Dad, one of the things you always taught me was, if you're going to learn something, have an understanding of it. So I don't know how many times I'd ask you about something, and you'd be like, well, read this. And form your opinion about it, and let's talk about it. Or you'd always give me, well, there's different ways of looking at it. And so it always just ingrained in me this idea of you can never look at any one topic from one perspective, and also the value of forming your own opinion. And one of the things you always taught me, there's no such thing as a bad opinion, as long as it was based on some fact, some logic, some reason. You thought about it. And that's where I look at something like this is what's missing in the country. And so if the country is not going to have this legitimate, honest, frank, real debate and look at this whole Green New Deal, well, then that's kind of that's our whole purpose, isn't it?
Well, half the Americans are not going to listen to it because it was, being introduced by the left. Same reason if you had something from the right being introduced, the other half on the left aren't. They're just not. It's you're shooting the messenger. Forget the message.
And a lot of it is basically you're going back. You're reversing the supply chain economics of Ronald Reagan.
That's
And
true.
most
Yeah.
of your conservatives, don't forget, Reagan was the conservative revolution. He introduced the whole new economic policy of supply side economics, which in order to get growth and spur investment, he said we had to reduce the marginal tax rates and give a big tax cut.
No, was he the first
Because
president
that
really to
would
throw
keep the
that out there?
investment.
Was he the first one to really throw out the whole idea of trickle down?
No.
Let's. So he wasn't the first
No.
one. Okay.
No, actually, the father of supply side economics was Jack Kemp.
He ran
And
for
then,
president, didn't he?
Vice president.
Vice president. Yeah.
Jack Kemp,
Dole.
yeah, Jack Kemp was the one who was a congressman who basically wrote the first designs on what a supply going from Keynesian demand to now supply side. And part of it was in order to spur investment, they wanted to cut the margin. They wanted to do a big tax cut, the marginal rates, to increase that investment, which would have a turn under the Lafleur curve on the one constant Lafleur. I'm giving you a high level that a tax cut would increase government revenue through the creation of new jobs, new investments, and they would be higher paying. So the loss in revenue from the cut in the tax rates would be offset by revenue increases and increased government, increased incomes in which the government would be getting, the income from the income taxes.
Which
But
makes
prior,
sense.
Yeah.
but prior to that, to the Reagan tax cuts, your marginal, the highest level of marginal taxes on basically about $1 million to about $1.2 million was almost 90% in 1965.
Okay.
And, and which the Kennedy tax cut, okay, he wanted to cut the tax rate, the top rate, from 91% to 65%. Because under that tax cut, that was, I'm trying to think of his economic advisor, Walter. I'm trying to think of his, he was from Wisconsin. And basically, they felt as though if they could reduce that, that would increase investment. And then also, at the same time that they were doing it, is reducing some corporate and increasing the ability to depreciate new equipment faster, which to business, that was a real big tax cut. And the Kennedy didn't live for it, but Johnson instilled it, in which, the marginal tax rate went down to 70%. And that was out there till 1981 until Reagan came along and he cut it down to 50%.
So
But
really, like it
was a big it was a unbelievable economic increase down at 65%. So
so it's not that crazy then, basically what you're saying. It's not like this thing out of left field. That's okay. All right. Because I think that's like almost like lesson number one almost of what she's putting out there isn't necessarily this like way out of left field. It's been kind of done. Now, it probably even before we even dive into it, like I'm going to go over some of the basics basically of it. So basically, yeah. So here's now good overview of it. All right. So basically, and this is where I do agree a little bit with her that I personally believe. I mean, Bill, Dad knows I'm a huge outdoors person. I love skiing. I love nature, and so the environment is a very big deal to me. And from my flying days, I have a very keen understanding of, I think, of meteorology and weather, obviously more than the layperson. And so the whole idea that we need to really take seriously our climate change is, to me, I think there is a lot to that. If we're having 100-year storms and floods every single year. We have these superstorms causing billions and billions of dollars, whether it be a winter storm, whether it be a hurricane, tornadoes, whatever. And so I do think something needs to get done. Now, is it as dire as I think that Ocasio-Cortez is putting out there? I don't know. But so the very the gist of it basically is that, okay, the world's going to hell in a handbasket with our, between our economy and economic principles and our environment. And so they set up this thing, okay, within 10 years, basically. So they have a 10-year window to make all these things happen. So one of them was a guaranteed job for anyone that wants to work with a livable wage, basically. So basically everybody will have high-quality health care. It's affordable housing. Everyone will have resources and training, whether it be some type of education. So basically, you want a job, you have a house, you're able-bodied, you're going to have health care. Big part they start getting into the energy and infrastructure. So within 10 years, we all have to be clean energy. We're talking about buildings have to be efficiency standards met within 10 years. They want zero carbon emissions within 10 years. So cars, didn't I
read that one of the early drafts was saying something, and correct me if I'm wrong or if it was just internet rumor and speculation, but it was something like they wanted to get rid of everyone's cars in the next 10 years.
It's not their cars. They said all transportation has to be zero carbon emissions. So electric, hydrogen. They want. I mean, they even said they want to work with farmers to make it to where there's no methane being put out by the animals.
The cows that are farting.
So I mean, yeah. And so now,
damn the cows! I knew it. So, you know what? They sit there, they lay there, they're smug.
I know.
They sit there all day long, and little did you know,
just chewing their cud.
They are killing the environment.
Quietly. Slowly, right? So that's like the big gist of it. And so how all this is going to get paid for is, as what she said, is anywhere between a 70 to 80% tax on anyone making above $10 million. Now, she said that, and a couple other the people who helped sponsor us said that they would like to see as high as 90%, right? And so that is where I think one, just putting out there this very bold agenda, and within 10 years, everyone laughed at it that it wasn't realistic. And then the big kicker, and this is where I think she wasn't doing herself any favor, if you look at a lot of conservative, like right-wing conspiracies, that the whole idea of global warming is a hoax to basically create these fake crises for the government to take over. And then, so what does she do? She then created a Green New Deal that was about the environment, but then throws in at the very end this economic inequality. And so all of a sudden people are like, yaha, you see, I knew this is how they were going to do it. And then, like, literally at South by Southwest yesterday, in her speech, she said capitalism was irredeemable.
Oh.
And so let's be honest, even if like you believe in a lot of this stuff, there's a lot of things being said. The rhetoric is very divisive. Not to mention, in the same week, Ocasio-Cortez was calling out moderate Democrats for actually working and compromising.
Oh, they're going
to put their name on the list.
Put them on the list.
So she's not doing herself any favors.
Well, she's not winning the hearts and minds. And when you think of historical socialist and communism. I mean, it's kind of ruled by an iron fist. Join us or else. I'm not saying that she's quite there yet, but join us or you're on the list, and you will do this in the next 10 years. It does make some of us go, yeah, here we go.
And that's where, and Dad, you live. I mean, I look at, we understand communism, like in the idea of it. Although the irony is that a lot of people who talk about communism, they did a survey. And a lot of millennials, and they asked like how many. It was like 70% said they knew what it was and had no idea. So let's go to the guy that grew up in a time when like Russia like was communist, and they almost got in a nuclear war with us. So Dad,
you hit under your desk.
So if anyone, a baby boomer or that generation is going to know communism, so Dad, when you hear these things, the guy who grew up in communism with Russia, does any of this jump out at you as, yeah, that's kind of worrying me a little bit? What do you think, honestly?
Nah, when I'm not doing it to point her out, but I listen to. I have to work with a lot of the millennial. They're fresh out of school, everything else. They're all bitching about student loans, that they shouldn't have to have the debt. That why do I have to work in a $50,000 a year job? I was told in college I should be making $150,000 to $200,000. Okay, when I listen to all of it, I sometimes sit back and saying, it's nice to be in a classroom and the professors are telling you all this and you're hearing it, but there is a real world out there. But when you talk to some of them, they're on there. But I think you got to just there's several different types of economic systems out there, and capitalism happens to be one. Communism, socialism happens to be one. And, for every action, there's a reaction. And, if you ever read Adam Smith's book, The Wealth of Nations, Adam Smith is the founder of classical economics. And he wrote his book right at the time of the American Revolution, and which is the fair market, which, is market-driven dynamic economy. And it essentially has the role of government is really just to provide an armed forces to protect the markets and the sources of resources and to protect the word for the markets. And basically, it's a laissez-faire. Is government shouldn't stick their nose into anything that is dealing with the economic cycle. They're to provide the minimal of services to there. Now, the thing that happened over the years in Europe is the fact that capitalism was really the capitalist was really a exploitator of labor. He was not responsible to social wings. They polluted the grounds, they stole, they gathered wealth, and then they went merrily on their way while the people suffered. They didn't offer competitive wages. There was no health benefits. You had children going to work. There were sweatshops. You had no OSHA because they didn't picture the role of government. So by the mid 19th century, Karl Marx and Hegel come up with the Communist Manifesto and dialectical materialism, which really is nothing more than a reaction to all the evils of capitalism. So capitalism by its own, where now instead everything is owned, it's a classless society, the proletariat, versus the bourgeoisie, and I sit there and I just listen to all this, going there, because essentially, if you go back, is your conservative almost wants to pull government out of business and let business run itself, and don't tax me, I'll invest it. Whereas the socialist one, the socialist communist wants to put everything under the government. Is basically the government owns everything and then distributes the wealth off, and the government becomes basically your caretaker. And I know I got a little bit off onto there, but the key being growing up in the 60s is we always heard is, our economy was, I remember my parents, that we had recession after recession, from the 50s to the 60s. And then we always heard the communist was the best systems and all that out there. And we actually found out that the Russian economy was imploding, is that it wasn't working. They had a 5-year growth plan, 6-year growth plans, and they were always failing because there just wasn't any of that incentive out there.
And the thing is, like, it's what a lot of the things I'm seeing online is almost like these memes where it's things that Hitler said, and then they're doing the splice of things that Bernie Sanders is saying, things that Ocasio-Cortez.
They do the same thing with Trump. They literally just take whatever they think, like it's weird because you see for example, I just always find it funny, the Antifa, the anti-fascist people will sit there and they will march and they will protest, and they're called the anti-fascists as they're waving the old Soviet flag, which is literally the poster child of, fascism.
I know.
I'm like, do you not see what's going on here?
And that's what's crazy. And it's like, and this is where I look at, this is my dad is saying, it's like, listen, like, I'm not scared of that. Yeah. But what you have to understand, and Dad, you and I have talked about this off the air, is that what you have to understand is that everything is a reaction to what was going on. And I think, Dad, what you're saying is that these young progressives that are coming into Congress now, all of this is a knee-jerk reaction to, well, a lot of it was they were promised one set of things in college, the jobs that you're going to get.
Yeah.
They don't like a lot of the jobs because to millennials especially, what's most important to them is work-life balance and being passionate about what it is that you want to do. They also see a lot of the wealth inequality. I think they do see a lot of the money staying really at the top. They see a lot of the polarization, and that simply what they're doing, this is a knee-jerk reaction. And I'm curious, Dad, you've worked in corporate America as an executive for years. Like, do you almost think that corporate America, they've had this coming for a while, that they've pushed it so far that this was an inevitability, and they're almost to blame for some of it? Do you think? Is that a fair statement to make?
Well, I think the blame goes all the way around. As you know, when we were growing up as kids, and even you kids, we really didn't have an internet.
No,
okay, we got a lot of
definitely.
our knowledge from our teachers, from the libraries, from newspapers, magazines, and very, very limited news type programs. We basically had this 6 o'clock news for a half. Sometimes it would start out was only 15 minutes, and then it moved. When the war came on, it moved to really basically a half an hour.
I didn't know that.
And the key was everybody was given the propaganda that this is the American dream. You go to you study, you go to school, you go to college, you study all. When you come out, okay, you're going to be able to buy all these new cars, you're going to have all these great jobs, and you're going to be able, okay, to have anything you want. All right, and all of a sudden, here comes the internet reinforcing everything. And the real world is this: our expectations of each generation was set so high that it was doomed to fail. I mean, I blame the schools, I blame business, I blame ourselves and everything else for putting out something out there that really in actuality was not attainable on a consistent basis, that somewhere along the line a reality check was going to come in. The other part is,
hey Dad, hey Dad, hold, I just want to hear you say one more time. I think we can blame ourselves. We all share blame. Can you say it one more time, please?
Yeah,
we all share blame. I just had to point that out.
In the military, we had a saying: we all got to take a bite of the shit sandwich.
I just love hearing because, and
I'm going to be very honest
to
with you.
hear.
I listen to these kids, and I'm listening. It took me. I don't know how many years I was in business before I even got to say 50,000. These kids coming out of school are expecting their first jobs to be almost $90,000 to $100,000. You know why? Because that's what the professors told them.
Yep.
Well, I think it's
and now they go out there to the marketplace. They're not willing.
Yeah.
They're not willing to pay. They're not willing to buy into the system, learn. It's expected to go from A to F.
Yeah.
And then when that doesn't happen, they fall back. I think the thing that really just scares me the most is not so much I always thought these lowering of the marginal taxes into the 30% and the 28%, that was all wrong. That's where we got some, but I think the thing that scares me the most is all these kids expecting all these areas, and now they're getting ready to say, now we're a political bloc.
Yeah.
And you've got a lot of people my age banging onto this, because this is the new baby boomers or whatever you want to do it, which really truly scares the hell out of me. And I think it's happening all over the world.
So it's basically the Green New Deal doesn't scare the crap out of me. It's the people who came up with it, basically.
The Green New Deal, it may or may not be a good idea, and it may or may not work. But I think one of the issues, it does have some, while it has some realistic ideas, it does have some not so realistic ideas where they're like, well, here's what we're going to do. Everyone's going to have a good job. Well, if it was so easy, I kind of feel
everyone would already have.
I would already have, right?
Yeah.
Everyone, and it was one part I think I read where it said that we were going to take care of even those, quote, unwilling to work. Not the people unable to work, which I'm all for. The people, even if you're unwilling to work, we will still provide you. Big Brother is going to take care of you. Just vote us into power.
And that's the thing where it's like, what is the...
That's scary.
Well, it seems like it's devoid of any economic reality of, so if you have a basic wage, living wage, everyone has... Like, what is that going to do to inflation? And then on top of that, and Dad, this is actually the one I would love to really have you sink your teeth into. And so the whole 90%, 80% tax rate. Now, the thing is, like, so when I did some research on this, so when the people brought up, well, this is what the tax rate was in the 60s, when literally that's when America had one of its best periods of prosperity. They go, well, it was only possible because our economy was largely a manufacturing, largely a goods and manufactured economy. That economy doesn't exist anymore. Ergo, the way that tax structure would never work anymore. That's the rationale that people have said. Now, I want you to kind of give your retort to that, and then two, what would the downstream effects be of businesses? Because I hear I could make $9,999 and I'm fine, but if I make $10 million, now all of a sudden I only take home $1 million. I could make $100 million.
Well, no,
and I only make 90.
Your marginal tax rates, as you earn, that $10 million is taxed over, say, 7 brackets.
Okay.
So if you're going to be going to 70%, it's for every dollar that you make after 10 million.
But doesn't that still take away your incentive?
Done at one.
That still takes away your incentive, though, doesn't it, technically? Because if you're a business, so let's say you and I we're in business, right? We're making $10 million and we have, a hefty tax rate, but it's fair. But then all of a sudden we're like, hey, listen, let's sink $100 million, or let's sink $10 million into automation. Let's double our business up, and so we can make more.
But hold it. Go back.
Yeah.
Go back. You're talking corporate tax.
Okay.
You're talking depreciation taxing on that. Her thing is on personal income. That's income that is driven from labor. That is not coming in from a corporate tax or the ability for the government to go back in and say, we're going to give you an accelerated depreciation for you to invest in building. And we're going to let you write off. You're running a business, in other words, after you pay off everything and all that, then you're taking your profit. When it comes to the investment now, the key being is, and this was part of the Reagan part, okay, is when he brought it down, he was saying is if we would bring down the tax rate, okay, the highest level on personal, all right, well, that would allow the rich to invest more in private investment, which would then go to the banks or to everybody else, and then the banks would take that money and inject it into the flow to allow businesses to go into the system and be able to borrow money at a cheaper rate, okay, so that they could do investment, and then the owner of that investment, okay, would then get interest, which would be taxed at a different rate, or it would be in the form of dividends or capital gains as he sold. Now, we're getting into a lot with taxation, but when you get into dividends and capital gains, essentially that has been taxed twice. It's been, first of all those profits that are being given back are taxed at the corporate rate for business. Then when it comes to you as the earner, that comes to you as a dividend, or you sold stock and everything else, you made capital gains. Now that's being taxed at an altogether different tax schedule.
That's what, 10% is the capital gains, I think, is what it is now?
Yeah, capital gains, and your dividends are all taxed as personal income. Okay, so, I see what they're all, saying is that this is a counter to the conservative revolution of the 80s, when the United States went from being liberal, and I think, B-Ray, you were mentioning it, is to where business had to be responsible to society, and the person that was making them responsible was the federal government. Okay? Now comes the conservative revolution, which Reagan, Tea Party, comes back, and they're saying, no, we're conservative. I believe in laissez-faire. We're going to go back to the Gilded Age of America when business ran amok. Okay, it didn't have to be controlled. The rich kept their money, and the government did not spend any money on social welfare programs. So when you take a look at the green, the way I've been starting to look at it is the green movement, in a way, is a counter to the Tea Party and the conservative revolution. Clinton and Obama raised the marginal tax rates higher. Okay, but you had Bush that gave tax cuts, and now came along Trump that gave tax cuts. Okay, and then comes Trump. That was one of the things that Trump came back and said, well, Obama did it. So anything that Obama did, Trump was going to come back and destroy it because, going into his legitimacy of the presidency. But the key being is this: I think if you look at it from John Kennedy gave us in his State of the Union the one time that we're going to put a man on the moon in this century. We're going to send a man to the moon. We're going to land him on the moon, and we're going to bring him home safely. And I think this was 1962. Who the hell even thought we had the technology to be able to do it? Going back to what they're saying as far as national health care, Harry Truman started the first idea of national health care. All right?
Wow.
He got destroyed, okay, by the Republicans because they're saying that's not the role of government, is to supply health care. Okay, so once Harry Truman left, Eisenhower would not pursue it. John Kennedy came up saying, we have to start protecting people. Maybe not universal, but we've got to give health care to our seniors. They're dying. They're not accessing the system. What came about was Medicare. Okay, in 1964, is Johnson passed the Medicare Act, in which we gave the first part, and that was, I'm telling you, I was there in high school when teachers were telling us we're now socialists, we're totally communist. We should not be doing this.
This is it, people. It's over with.
We should refuse. We should rebel. Doctors saying this is ridiculous. We cannot do it. Oh, this is bad. Everybody. All of a sudden, somebody began to realize, wow, doctors, I could become millionaires. I can charge seniors who weren't even going to the system. I can now become a millionaire. They're going to access the system.
Yep.
Hospitals. Holy shit. Instead of having these rinky-dink little brick buildings, I can build Taj Mahals. Why? Medicare said because we need more doctors to treat more of the people that are going to come under there. So we're going to subsidize hospitals, and we're going to give you stipends.
Greed finds a way.
So all
Funny
that's
how that
going
works.
on now
It always does, yeah.
is
so crazy.
everybody's reacting because, you know why? Because everybody is totally biased on there, polarized. Because the conservatives are worried, I'm going to start losing control, and I'm going to, all of a sudden, I'm going to be paying more.
Well, it's like socialism to communism, and then it's like if just because you have a socialism, it's going to be like we're going to be Venezuela, and that's the thing where because think about it, I mean, like because it seems like back in your day something got passed, and that's where the fear got kicked in, but at least something can get passed. Now you can't get anything passed because if it even so much it doesn't pass the smell test of absolute pure democracy and whatever, it doesn't get passed, and then they immediately start going to those fear tactics.
Well,
and
they have to. I mean, that's what they do.
Yeah.
You go back to the 60s again. Business was allowed to do whatever they want. Okay, here comes the Democrats after Republicans, which, they're liberal, and John Kennedy was moderate. So I'll let everybody get. Kennedy comes back
Long
and
hairs.
he says, we have got to start cleaning up the environment. Okay? We are polluting and killing ourselves. The air we breathe is rotten.
Must have been,
Okay,
well,
the
they're
water
dropping a
we
nuclear
drink
bomb
is
test
polluted.
twice a week.
Oh, yeah, of course. Yeah, had nothing to do
15
with it.
years.
Yeah.
I mean,
Figure that one.
I can tell you growing up as a kid, whereas now, is that there would be mornings that we would wake up and there'd be a fog with a smell in it. And that was from the chemicals that the chemical plant was burning off.
Jeez.
And was polluting the air, that your car's paints were peeling and everything. They would throw their effluents into the river. I think the biggest thing that started everybody wakening up is the day that, I think it was the Detroit River, or the Cuyahoga River.
Oh, caught on fire.
Yeah.
All right. And all of a sudden, oh, wow. But they caught everybody that was an ecologist at that time. They called them idiots, nuts, and everything else. Colleges started offering courses in ecology, environmental sciences. It's the same thing as where somebody said, our cars have to be less pollutant. Well, what are we going to do about it? Well, we're going to build smaller cars. We're going to build smaller engines. We're going to put smog control on.
They destroyed the Mustang. Kano Mustang.
Yeah. I mean,
but history's basically repeating itself.
And everything.
Yeah.
And she's coming back and saying, this green thing, they're all coming back and saying, we already have the technology to build an electric car. We already have the technology in the batteries. But these kids are not, I hate to say the kids, these people are not putting it in the same sense as the politicians because it's them. They're putting it into a way that's rubbing everybody raw. But
that you just nailed it right.
Why shouldn't we have a national program that we don't need gasoline and that we're going to build an infrastructure that's going to allow cars to be propelled by hydrogen? I mean, the hydrogen fuel cell technology is out there.
Yeah.
There's even been some prototype stations to burn hydrogen as a fuel rather than gasoline. The problem is, who's going to supply the infrastructure?
Well, there's a great book by it. It's called The Hydrogen Economy. I think, Dad, you and I both read that, where their big thing was...
it's a great book.
They go, if you want to save the American economy, we should become the purveyors of this technology where everyone's buying it from us and be the first ones to it. And then in the process, we're updating our own infrastructure with the money that's made from them buying the same stuff. So there's a lot to it. And I've actually been... Say what?
It's solar.
Yeah.
And who's working that kind of technology now? Because we didn't invest.
Well, Obama and all them kind of, I think, put a sour taste in everyone's mouth because everyone talks about government investment, they bring up Solyndra. And this is where I think Ocasio-Cortez and all the progressives, they're doing more harm to their cause than I think good because it is unrealistic, even from a financial perspective, to make all this happen in that short. I mean, they're talking about tearing down buildings and rebuilding them so they're meeting certain specs, zero emissions, getting rid of basically people eating meat because the cows can't make methane. It stands no chance of passing. It stands no realistic way of working. And in the process, the way they chose to daisy chain it with the weather and in climate, where every conspiracy person's been saying this is the reason why they want to take over everything through this weather initiative, they're picking every worst way imaginable to roll these things out. And in my mind, they've made it to where it's toxic now. They've, to me, because of the millennials, at least I really believe a lot of millennials out there, they're so single-minded with I want change and I want it now, and they're so impatient that they don't realize by being impatient and demanding it now, they're setting it back 100 years. I really think they have caused more damage to the cause. And if they would have just come out and said, Dad, some of the things that you were talking about, let's talk about our economy for a second. Let's actually sit down like a professor and go, here's why things are out of whack. This is why it worked back then. This is what it would look like. This is why I think we should be doing it. It's a different story. The way they're going about it, and then if you start doubting it, you're a moderate, and then your name should be on the list.
Yeah, with that whole list thing, man, you're using scare tactics. And,
it sounds like they're communists.
Well, coming from a socialist anyway, she's going to have more hurdles than your average politician.
Yep.
Republican, Democrat, liberal, conservative, you name it, right? Tea Party member. But when you say libertarian, but when you say I am a socialist, even though she called herself a democratic socialist,
you're a
I
communist.
got to tell you right now, man, you just are.
It's based saying going.
You
hey,
can have the best ideas.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, you're still going to have a lot of people, including myself, that's going to go, yeah, dude, but she's a socialist. So does it doesn't end there? Where does it go from there?
I'll tell you the truth. I'll be very honest with you. When one of the debates, the Democratic debates, and I don't know how it came out, but somebody said, "Are you a Democrat, Bernie? You're an independent, but you're running as a Democrat. What are you?" I'm a socialist Democrat, and I went, "You got to be totally shitting." You just said that. You just scared the shit out of probably 50%. As John Kennedy said, when you start out, it's basically 50-50 if you can make it.
Yeah.
The objective is to get 51% of the people.
And you just scared off 5% of them.
Yeah, and I'm going, you don't ever come across with that because, that could smack of, National Socialism. Because if you really go into the economic policies of Nazi Germany, is they took a bankrupt nation, a completely bankrupt nation, and rebuilt one of the most unbelievable industrial states there, from highways and infrastructure and everything else. But they were sick in the head. They were radicals. And I think sometimes I sit and listen to the way people speak. I'm going, you guys are scaring me. I think you have some good ideas that could be great to get into committees, investigate, bring people in, hold hearings, and start looking at, are there programs out there that we haven't seen, or does it make sense to fund it with government money? I mean, in Japan, they had a program. I don't know if they still do. I haven't really looked at it, but when I worked for Honda, the Japanese told me they invest in, and it's a national fund that the government helps give money to growing industries. So as the one industry dies out, there's a bunch of them on the back burners. But I don't see any of that ever even coming about right now because everybody's taking, even from, the Republican side, and now you've got these young Democrats, and you've got these other part of the Republican coming in from the Tea Party, which are older, a little bit older, and they're looking at the younger generation in contempt. So there's nothing going to be there. So now these younger generation representatives and the people entering government, they're coming in with, and believe me, I've worked with them. They come in with a very high-minded attitude sometimes. And I don't mean that derogatory, but they can get you mad.
Well, they know everything.
And the part that always gets me, when they do it, they say, well, we shouldn't have to pay for a college. I didn't tell you to go to college.
Right. I was just going to say that too. Well,
Well, and
I said, we do pay school. Public school, you are getting some of the best education in the whole world through high school. And most of you guys just farted away anyway. But we are paying that bill. I gave you a high school diploma. You can go to VOTEC, which is in some cases, VOTEC schools are subsidized.
And the thing is that a lot of their anger is misplaced. They're blaming, I think, everybody else for spending a ridiculous amount of money on college, expecting that they're going to get a return on that, these expensive private schools. And the reality is, it's like, you know what, you kind of picked the wrong deal. Now, I will say, though, being somebody who does a lot with career counseling and helping college kids, I think there really is a big problem, though, is there's been so many jobs outsourced that now what's been happening is that it is that much more difficult now to get a job. It used to be you get a job, you get a college degree. Even if it wasn't like what you wanted to do, you're still finding something. Now you're graduating, and that first job is 1 to 2 years of experience.
Right.
And the thing is, the professors aren't preparing kids at all. You'd think you'd be paying $150,000 for an undergrad degree, and the professors, because they don't work in the real world, they're not saying anything. They're not saying, hey, listen, your sophomore year, you need to start hooking up your first internship.
Yeah.
You need to be doing all this, and they don't, and they graduate and they're angry. And I do think there's a lot of legitimate anger. I think the only problem is that they're displacing it as it's the system as a whole. They're throwing out the baby with the bathwater. They want to disrupt and destroy everything. And the reality is the Democrats are smart enough to realize this is not the right play. It's never going to pass anything more than just being a very destructive, angry, I think, wing to the Democratic Party. There's almost a part of me, it almost feels like, are they allowing them to do this almost to make them look like fools? No, go for it. Yeah, no, go and speak. You're ready. Go for it. Have fun with that. Let's see what happens. It
could be even to the point, the age-old guys, the old statesmen, the modern, they're letting them to go out there and throw up the red herring.
Yeah, is this like a Mr. Miyagi lesson of
they're
like
coming back and sitting back and saying, "I'm not going to get into this, but throw it up.
Yeah, go for it. See what happens.
What it does."
Yeah,
and I may then become that person who gets the credit because I'm going to watch this thing very, very carefully.
Somebody in the Democratic Party has to be sitting back and watching all these progressives going, I just want to see what happens. And the thing is, then they're either
like a social experiment.
Well, I think, Dad, as you said, that you're right. There's one part. So we're looking at hypotheses. One is, okay, someone's sitting back to going, all right, let's see what gets thrown at the wall. And if it works, I'm going to come in there. But if it doesn't, I've been staying out of it, or I've been almost against it. Now I'm going to come in as the parent in the room going, all right, oh, you said you can build this? Okay, great, let's build it. And then when you come to me at midnight when your test is due the next day and I have to help you finish it, I'm going to be like, I told you. And then I'm going to come to the rescue. That almost seems to me like why you see guys like Biden and a lot of the moderates are kind of just hanging back, waiting to see what's going to happen.
He's no dummy.
And that's how I almost feel what all this is about. They're letting the progressives almost have that voice and go, make a fool out of yourself, because you're going to see what politics is really like. Good luck, because to me, it doesn't make any political sense. The other hypothesis I have, it's all about street cred. It's like you get to the game and you're like, I'm going to keep this real. Remember Dave Chappelle when keeping it real goes wrong?
Yeah.
That's where I almost feel. It's like they're throwing this stuff out there because I know a lot of these progressives. I have clients that are these progressives, and they're so. I'm talking down to the terminology and more verbiage that they use, what they believe in. It has to be militant and black and white.
And it's right now.
It has to be right now. And it's like if you go in there and not spout that same thing, the same thing that you see with athletes, they get to the league and it's like, hey man, remember where you came from, remember the neighborhood, and it's like if you don't, you're a sellout.
You sold out.
That's the problem, and it's almost like, are they throwing it out there just for street cred so they can get elected? But if they do that, the problem is they're going so far in that direction. They're destroying the very movement that they believe strongly in.
Well, with AOC. The issue I have with her is
AOC.
Yeah, well, that's what she calls herself.
AOC.
It's brilliant marketing.
It is
AOC. Everyone knows who that is. And the thing with her, that the problem I have is, here's a woman who, and not to put her down or their profession down, but the facts are the facts. Here's a person who a year ago was tending bar. Okay, she's 29 years old. Nothing wrong with these things, right? She now graduates by basically winning the lottery and winning her, elected position. And now she's going to make $174,000 a year.
Yeah.
If she gets reelected one time, which is in 2 years?
Pension, yeah.
She gets $174,000 a year every year for life.
And remember, then she loses, she's going to make even more money because of her name that she's made now.
Of course. But that's my point, though, is now we have a person who's going to, because she's going to win re-election. And she's too popular, let's be honest. I'm not saying she'll go necessarily further than that to higher office, but she's going to probably be
She'll try, though.
Well, yeah, she probably will. But my problem is now you have someone who's basically sitting on $174K a year for life, no matter what she does. But she's going to tell everybody else now, well, let me show you how we're going to do the economy, and here's why you've been ripped off, and here's how we're going to make it. I'm like, you will never struggle again in your life ever on any level whatsoever and you're going to tell all of us how we should run our lives. And I'm like, well, wait a minute. I would almost rather hear a struggling person or a person that's making something similar to the average median income saying, here's how we are going to do it. And not how, well, here's how you're going to do it.
Now,
we'll be fine.
Remember, and the thing is, remember with her, the second you had, like, for example, it was this week, in closed-door meetings, we had Democrats that were elected in Republican strongholds. And so they're literally going, I have to stay close to the center, otherwise I'm going to lose. Pelosi, AOC, and all of them were chastising them for like protecting and representing their own people. They were literally angry because they put their own constituency before the party.
Mike, it's like you said several episodes ago, and we've talked about this before. It is a gang warfare.
It is.
Blood in, blood out for life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay,
Dude, totally is.
That's what it is.
Yeah.
On both sides of the aisle. And if you're not, guess what? Then we don't got your back when it comes election time.
Yeah.
Basically.
I look at this as nothing more than we went through it in the '60s when they called all of us a bunch of hippies.
Long hairs.
And we were the generation of teachers
smoking dope.
We always wanted to change everything, and you guys are hippies, and they beat the crap up out of us, and you have to
Applebee's and rice patties.
You have to be this. Your country is going to go to hell if you're running it. Oh my God! I remember once he's going. I don't know. I think I'm leaving the country if I have to even think you kids are going to be running. Oh. And it's what's beautiful about America is, guess what? We're always changing.
Yeah.
And there's always going to be a big generational change somewhere along the line. And economically, I've always been against this low marginal rate for the higher income. I always thought there should be a lower rate in the middle because they're there. But, I don't falter on the fact that after everything is said and done, then the income should be. I mean, that's been our history, and it's not going to change it. So, but I think on some of our other things, it's just the fact that each generation presents something different to the generation that's trying to hold on.
Yeah, and that change, I think, has happened. That generational difference has happened so much quicker now. Used to be like 30 years, that was one generation. Now it's like
internet.
Every 5 years there's a new generation.
Millennials, and we have, Generation X.
They are
Generation
so
Y.
well. I mean, our idea of Facebook was a note in the class. That you handed out, and if the teacher got the shit beat out of you, and you had to read it.
Read it out loud.
That was our Facebook. That XYZ is a nasty pig or something like that, or I can't remember popularity things or whatever.
It was called Facebook back then because if they caught you, the teacher would actually hit you in the face with a
book. Yeah,
and it was legal.
I mean, yeah. I mean, it was. If anything, it was a good tool to use, right? I mean,
but today, I mean, we didn't have any ways of communication other than we had to know how to write.
Smoke signals.
Today,
wiring the can across the street.
We had to really know how to talk to each other face to face. Not, I'll pass the note. I can't talk to you because even though you're alongside of me, I'm texting you.
Right. Yeah, I'm sitting next to you texting.
Well, honestly, that's an awesome, Dad. That is an awesome point because, and this is where I think it's getting interesting. When we talk about that generational difference of change, right? One of the things I've been talking about so long with my clients is that, we grew up in an era where it was like, man, think about, from 50 years ago, like in the early 2000s, where it was like, in the 60s, black people were using separate, bathrooms and water fountains and riding in the back of the bus, and then looking at how long it took for equal rights and quote unquote equal rights, right? And then think about gay rights, where they were at in the 80s, right? And then look where they're at now. Look at trans rights, and it's like what took 40 years now took 20, and then 10, then 5. And so kids grew up in an era where they saw all these radical changes happening so quickly, and they almost become used to, well, change happens fast, but not realizing, well, when it happens organically, yes, but when you're going against a grain, it's a little bit different. And now we have a generation where they grew up talking to each other and communicating and organizing, getting elected over the internet. But now when they're talking to legislate, to talk with people and bring people together, it's almost like you see how they're talking, and it's like you're right. They don't have that ability to communicate face to face and communicate an idea in a normal way that appeals to mass audiences. And this experiment with these young progressives is going to be interesting. Of, do they learn how to, I guess, can they learn and without ruining the causes that I think a lot of us do believe in, but the messaging is all wrong.
It's the aging of maturity.
And that's where, and I think that's, well, and I think that it's reversed, where it's like, I think the hippie generation was very much about trying to get that older generation how to like maybe see and do things kind of differently. But now it's like we got these, once again, these very individual, these generations gaps. It's like, once again, you have like within 5 years now, you have 5 different generational gaps and shifts. And it's like, if it was tough enough to try to talk with everyone as one America together before, it's even more difficult now. I still think that I'm still waiting for the adult in the room to kind of go, listen, I hear what you're saying. I hear what you're saying. But here's the reality of who we are as a country and where we need to go. And I hear where you're coming from. And you're right. We do need to do something about that. Like, that's what I'm waiting for, I think.
Here's the key. When you, one of the things I always remember my mother saying, she hated Eisenhower as a president. Hated him.
Dwight.
And she said, he's the grandfather. Okay. Yeah. And in the old families, who were the strongest people in the family? Were grandfathers and grandmothers.
Yeah. Greatest generations.
Okay. Still. And based on there is you had a generation that fought World War II. That was the great generation that now they were becoming politically stronger. Okay. And then you had another generation, which was the baby boomer, not the baby boomer itself, but that generation, like your uncle, Michael, that was born right at the time of World War II coming in. They were generation gaps. And what it was, you got to have somebody that is the father figure, the grandfather, who keeps everybody in line and transitions these changes. Yeah. And today we don't have it.
Well, think about it. Howard Schultz is trying to do that, and it's like his idea is correct. The parties are not representing each other. We need that independent party, but he's not the right person for it. But that's what we're waiting for.
I'm just hoping somewhere along the line in the next 2 years, that father figure comes out to where the generations that are in change, the baby boomers and the older, and the newer, that is the person that brings us all together.
And I'm
divisive, but everything. But as far as economically wise, I think their program has the capability of making the United States and its economy probably the premier.
Yeah.
But the problem is it's scaring the hell out of everybody.
You got to do the messaging right. It has to be tiered. And you have to address people's fears, I think, of, I know this is going to scare you, and I hear why it scares you, but let me tell you why I think you have nothing to be fearful of. And that's what I think is missing. But I think that's the problem with our politicians, is that I think a lot of them themselves don't understand it. They're just...
they're more worried about in my opinion, self-preservation.
Yeah.
I think a lot of
they know they're losing power.
Yeah.
They've had it for so long. And
if you say too much, it's almost like in a law. It's like in the law, like if you're on a trial.
Yeah, and I really do think you need to take these younger people, these newer people coming in. There's some great people on both sides that have gone through the Iraq wars and the Afghan that are there.
A lot of moderates too. Those war veterans are moderates too.
Well, that's where we got to get in there. Yeah, want real change.
And think about it. We have a lot of the veterans are purposely being moderates.
Yeah. Well, they know you got to get along.
They could be the new founding fathers, but I have no doubt in my mind if we would have reacted that way to Kennedy saying we're going to put a man on the moon, to where she came out and said the tea about, we're going to do away with carbon and all that. Well, that's a great national guide. That puts us together. That gives us a plan. It gives us a focus, and we work to it. Whoever thought in 1969 we put a man on the moon?
But I think the only difference is, though,
in 1962. Yeah,
okay, but Dad, you have to look at, though, the only major difference, though, is that everyone looked at we had to do it because Russia was going to get us, and we knew that for a fact. The problem with climate is that no one can even agree whether or not it exists, and then a lot of people who don't think it exists, it's purely just a tool for communists and socialists to take over our country. And so that's that main big difference. Before we run out of time, Bill, what was that last little point you were going to make?
Oh, I was just going to say, very obvious, if we want change, we have to elect people that are more progressive, whether you're conservative or liberal.
Exactly.
I think most of the elected officials we have in now are about self-preservation. They don't, I think they are, it's so far left or so far right that I think that they're exploiting the people. I think they have it figured out, saying, you know what, I'm going to go with, the internet community. I'm going to go with the people that got me here because they are so anti the other side that I'm going to share their values, and that means I'm not going to meet in the middle to get anything done, because that way I can fall back. Yeah. I think they have it figured out. They can say, well, I'm going to get reelected because I can go to my hardcore base that keeps me in power and say, see, guys, I'm fighting for you. I'm trying, but I'm holding them off. I'm holding them at bay and keep me in there because, we have to counteract them. And it's they're more about telling the people, hey, I'm going to stop the other side.
Yeah.
Okay. As opposed to I'm going to actually get shit done. And I think that they're actually exploiting that, saying, man, I'm the only one that's helping stop the other side from having their entire, whatever side you're on.
Yeah.
And I think they think that now if they can solve an issue and compromise, it's just a bonus. But I think they're more worried about staying in power. And we got to get some progressive people on both sides and work together and say, listen, we all live in this country.
Well, think about it. If you're so far left or far right, you have to cater to your party. Whereas if you're just coming from the center, I'm just trying to help, you have leeway now.
Well, but the parties are becoming so far apart. Like, that's the problem.
So now I'm going to throw something out here, and I know we got to wrap things up here, and so I'm going to throw this last little thing out there, this kind of little nugget, and I think we almost have to come back to this one because I think this is a really big
two-parter.
This is almost a two-parter. But me personally, and I'll let you guys give your final opinion on what I'm about to drop out there, but I personally think, number one, Trump is going to win re-election, and two, I think it is necessary if the Democrats are so lost right now, especially with how progressive they've gotten. I think the Democrats almost have to lose for them to finally look at themselves in the mirror to kind of go, yeah, we're not doing it right. We're not representing people. We're not connecting. We don't have a message. And I think it's going to take for them to lose again, for them to maybe figure it out. Dad, last kind of word. Do you think that's accurate? That's what it'll take?
I in my heart and soul, my heart and soul, I'd like to reject it, but in my heart and soul and being in practicality, I'd have to say this is that the Democratic Party still has no direction.
None.
It's still got age-old leadership.
Yep.
And until they come up with an identity and a leader that can do it, I think, unfortunately, we're going to get another Trump 4 years.
They'll take heads rolling to basically kind of go, wow. I mean, to me, they come across, especially with AOC in this wing, they come across like one of my families that come into my office where the kids are telling the parents to go F themselves. They're basically, the parents are afraid of the kids and letting them, they're walking on eggshells. That is, to me, a dearth of leadership. You see it on a football and baseball team when you have the players going out and speaking and saying and doing whatever, turmoil in the locker room. That the players don't believe in the coach and the coach has lost the team. That, to me, is the Democratic Party. They don't have that message.
Yeah.
Bill, what do you think?
I agree with what you're saying. I think Trump, whether you like it or not, gets reelected strictly because people vote their wallet, and the economy is going pretty well. So I think barring some kind of, him being indicted or impeached or something, major revelation, which still could happen.
Yeah.
I think he does get elected because I don't think
Well,
the Democrats have it. Booker, Harris, Warren. I just don't see them energizing the base enough. If Hillary couldn't get enough people to the polls.
No.
Bernie, I like him on a personal level. He seems like he actually does seem to care, and he seems like...
I just don't believe in what he's saying.
I don't know if he has enough in the tank to get elected.
Yeah, just like Biden.
No.
I think I don't know if he has enough.
Biden, maybe. He hasn't declared, but I don't know.
He's the best chance, but even then, I don't know if he has enough.
Well, if
Trump is a juggernaut in that movement.
Well,
man, no one's figured out how to beat him yet.
If the economy was not doing as good as it currently is, it'd be different.
Yeah.
But I learned that years ago that the people are going to vote their wallet.
Yeah.
It's just
it's gonna be tough, you know.
Yeah.
So yeah, we're obviously going to have to come back
down.
down. Yeah, we're obviously going to have to come back down to this one. But I think, you know, in summation, I think number one, I think Dad, you said it best. It's like, listen, like this whole Green New Deal in and of itself doesn't scare me. It's more the militant nature of this wing and how one track minded they are, and just that's the part where it comes across as scary. But in the same breath, though, you're like, this has basically been the same debate that's been going on in the 60s, in the 70s, in the 80s, and it's always going to be like this, and it's no different than what it was. I think what we're also realizing is this Green New Deal, it's not the end of the world from an macroeconomic perspective. It's not going to send the world, and if anything, it has some sound business principles. That being said, the way this thing is being rolled out, how it's being rolled out, how it's being packaged together with the climate change. It's the literally
France tried that and failed.
It's like the single worst way of bringing it together. And then the fact that it's like saying it's a socialist. That's like saying my molester Uncle Bob, you know, he's a good guy. It's like, it doesn't matter what you say after that. You say socialist in this country, you might as well say I'm a fascist.
She should have came up with a different name.
I
with
know.
Bernie. I don't care. Call him something else besides it. You can have all the same values. Call yourself something else. Make something up. I don't know.
So,
I don't know.
As I said, I hate that term social democrat.
It's so stupid.
If anything in the world that I just thought it turned me off from the first day when I heard that did it. I was no longer listening to him.
Yeah, and that's the thing. I think, Dad, like you're a subset of the quintessential baby boomer moderate, independent. That the second I hear that, I'm not listening anymore. I almost don't want to.
Yeah.
So all right, let's wrap this one up, because once again we're gonna have to come back down to this one hands down. So, Dad, thanks so much, Professor, for coming on, because this is one of those to where we need that person who understands context of the past. We need someone who actually understands the economy to really break these things down. And plus, you have been a student of politics and since once again since the 60s, so I think we need that differing kind of viewpoint, and so we appreciate it as always. Bill,
well, we
my
didn't
man,
even hit the economy.
It's been a pleasure.
We haven't even
that?
hit the economy yet.
I know. So we're gonna come back down to that one. I actually do want to have another conversation about how good the economy really is. And I think, and what are the different metrics that we should be looking at? Maybe the economy is great. Maybe it isn't as great as everyone says it is. I don't know. But that's another conversation. So, Professor, we're going to have you on for that one. So, all right. I think on that note,
research.
Yeah. All right. Well, everybody.
Bully.
I know. On behalf of myself, Professor Richard DeVine, Dad, Bill, Billy Ray Reed, Armchair Quarterback, the Armchair Quarterback podcast host now, and myself, Michael DeVine. So everybody, appreciate you for joining in, keeping it in the gray with us. Hope you learned something, and obviously we're going to continue this one. So just remember, everybody, next time someone asks you, hey man, you Democrat, you Republican, you conservative, liberal, nah man, fuck that noise. My ass is gray. On that note, everyone, you have a good evening. Peace.
All right. Bully.